Hi. So today we're going to go further into the Gilded Age, and we are going to look at some of the consequences of that laissez-faire economy that was happening. And so we're going to take a look at what is called the labor movement. And the question we're going to answer is, what economic issues developed in the Gilded Age, and how did the labor movement try to fix them? And so, before we get too far into this, I want you to take a look at these images. And so, if we are chatting in Zoom, I'll stop and we can have a discussion. And if not, then you can just go ahead and you can leave your feedback in the play pause it video. And so, take a look at these images. You have skilled labor versus unskilled labor. And so, who do you think has more power and why? And so hopefully you said skilled labor. Why do they have more power? Because they have specific skills. They build whole things. You need them. The person is valuable. In these images, unskilled labor, it's somebody who does repetitive tasks and basically they can get anybody to do it. So the person is not really valued. The object is going to be more valued than the person's skill. And so in the chat, you may unmute yourself if you're chatting on Zoom, or just answer in the play pause it. So I'm going to ask you guys, describe what laissez-faire means. And then why might laissez-faire be good for business? And what are the bad things about laissez-faire? So go ahead and take a look at the notes that you made a copy of today, and that'll help you with answering these questions. And so let's think about laissez-faire. So remember, laissez-faire means lazy hands. It means hands off government. The government doesn't do anything to regulate business. And so what's going to happen when the government takes that approach towards the economy is that the wealthy and business owners are going to be able to accumulate a lot of wealth. And what tends to happen is the poor is not able to do that. Have you ever heard of the saying, it takes money to make money? Well, in a lot of cases, it is true. And so you can see in this graph in 2008, the black line, that's like the highest income. And you can see that down here, these are the lowest incomes. I know that's about 10 years ago, but our numbers are pretty much the same today. And so again, here's another graph that's showing us more recent numbers of income tax uh, since 1979. And so you can see percent change in after income tax. So that's going to be really, so who has the most money after income tax? You're going to see that there's a significant gap between the really wealthy and then everybody else. And so in the Gilded Age, because there is this development of industrialization and because of free enterprise and laissez-faire and entrepreneurs and innovation, there's also going to be the development of this new working class. And so these workers are essential and critical to these processes of making money and industrialization. And so this new working class, they're going to be a source of very cheap labor. So that means people who are not skilled and people who are not paid very much. And so a large source of this cheap labor is going to be from immigrants. So in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, that's when there is a huge wave of immigration to the United States, largely from Southern and Eastern Europe, also from China and some from Mexico too. And so these immigrants, they are going to work in the unskilled labor market. A lot of times the best jobs are going to go to the native born Americans, and those are the people whose family had been in the United States for a couple of generations. Of course, not the Native Americans who live on reservations. African Americans in the North and in the South, they are going to continue to be discriminated against, and so they'll actually be in competition with jobs with the immigrants, kind of like our situations today. And so the working conditions that these workers face are really horrendous. They're really terrible. And so today you'll hear a lot of news about like, oh, people have to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, or you have to have both parents working to make ends meet. Well, it was the same back then as well. And so a lot of times families needed the mothers to work. They needed the children to work. They needed the fathers to work. So everybody had to go work in these poor paying jobs in order to make enough to get by every day. And so women are going to be hired by factories because a lot of the factory owners are going to say, oh, well, let's just hire women because we don't have to pay them as much. And so women are going to work in a lot of like clothing factories and textile factories. And then a good portion of children are going to work, like 20% of children. And so they're going to work also in garment factories and canneries where they're going to can food. They'll work in mines and shoe factories. And so the working conditions are, like I said, really terrible. They're paid really, really, really low wages. They work for like, I don't know, what are the hours in this slide? Like 7:30 a.m. to 9 p.m., regardless of your age. They're going to work for less than 10 hours. It might $10 like a week probably, and minorities are going to get paid even lower. And so a lot of the children who are working in the factories, they're going to get their arms stuck in machines. A lot of people are going to get overworked and overtired. The kids might lose their arm, they might lose their feet. The kids who worked in the mines, they would often go blind from being in the dark for so long. They would also get this disease called black lung from breathing in maybe coal from the coal mines or like pollution from the factories. And so there are a lot of problems that came with working in those factories. And so remember, the whole goal of industrialization and the companies who are making things at this time is productivity enhancement. So what do they want? They want to make things efficiently. And so a word I want you to remember is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. So last class we talked about Taylorism, and the whole goal of Taylorism was to make things efficiently, quickly, and cheaply. And so, again, if you're watching the play, pause it. You can go ahead and pause and respond. How did business owners justify the working conditions in the Gilded Age? So what was their goal? What was the goal of all the industry? And so workers are going to find ways to fight back against these businesses. And so they are going to say, hey, these businesses, these factories, they can't run without us. And so they're going to organize and they're going to go on what is called a strike. And so a strike is when a group of workers refuse to work in order to put pressure on a business owner to change their policies. And so in the 1880s, there's going to be a series of strikes called the Great Upheaval. And even this goes into the 1890s and the early 1900s as well. And so workers from across the nation are going to protest. They're going to protest against low pay. And the response of the businesses is going to actually be to have massive pay cuts. And so they are going to retaliate against the workers. And so there's going to be railroad strikes. One specific strike is going to happen, and it's called the Haymarket Riot. And so what happens here is there's a large group of workers who were meeting, and this was written in German, because remember, a lot of the workers, they were immigrants, and so it's written in German. And so there's a meeting, and so they all rally around this square. And so they are going to go on strike. They're going to have a protest. And so rumor has it that there was a worker who threw a bomb. And then there's going to be another side of the story that are going to say the police fired on the workers. And so there's this continuation of this argument of the workers versus the police. And so a lot of times these labor movements are going to be connected to violence. The Homestead strike. This video is a video that's in Blend that you can watch after this. And so this is actually a strike that occurs on Andrew Carnegie's steel mill. And so remember, Andrew Carnegie is the guy who believes in the gospel of wealth. And so what happens is his workers go on strike, and he has a manager at this plant. And his manager hires a whole bunch of private security guards. And so there is a large fight between the security guards and the workers. And so I won't tell you everything. You can watch the video once you're done with this. The Pullman strike is a strike against a railroad car company. And so what happens is these strikers go on strike because this guy also owns the land that they live on. So he's also their landlord, and they have to pay him rent. And so they have to pay him rent, and he pays them. And so what he does is he raises their rent, but he doesn't raise their pay. And so basically they're kind of stuck, just like this cartoon shows. They're stuck between these two obstacles. They don't have enough money to pay their rent, but at the same time, he's the guy who's paying them. So how are they going to make enough money? And so they go on strike. There's a lot of damage that's done to his property, and the government is going to rule in favor of Pullman because his property was damaged. They are not going to rule in favor of the strikers. And so as these strikes are happening, there's going to be a situation where workers are going to organize. They're going to use this tool called collective bargaining. And so they're going to say, we are stronger together. Again, these factories can't run without us. So if we all commit to this one goal, we can fight the business owners, and they will be forced to change. And so that is called collective bargaining. And so this collective bargaining is going to evolve into what is called a labor union. And so that's an organization of workers that are committed to fighting for improving working conditions. And so there's going to be three primary workers' unions in the Gilded Age that develop. The first one is the American Federation of Labor, AFL. And so if you hear AFL-CIO, that's still a prominent organization that fights for workers' rights. And so it's going to be made primarily of skilled workers. The industrial workers of the world is going to be a more radical group. And they are actually going to fight for the abolition or getting rid of this whole system where people work for wages or work for hourly pay that tends to take advantage of the working people. And so you can see here they say wage equals slavery. And then finally, another group, the Knights of Labor, they're going to be a little bit more chaotic than the American Federation of Labor. They're kind of like a group of immigrants, and they're also fighting for their rights as well. They tend to be seen as more violent. And so I want you to take a look at this political cartoon. This is one of my favorite political cartoons, I think, of all time. And so the title of the cartoon is called Bosses of the Senate. And so here, this is supposed to be U.S. senators. And so just in case you need a recap on our government, each state elects 2 senators. And so these senators are supposed to represent us. However, let's take a look in these corners. So in these corners, it says people's entrance, and that is closed. So who is not in this cartoon? People, us, right? And so let's take a look at these big old guys, because you can't deny that they're there. They're taking up so much space. And so typically when artists draw things that take up a lot of space, that usually means they're important and they probably have power. So let's see who is important and who has power. And so if you look at this cartoon, it says steel beam trust, copper trust, sugar trust, paper bag trust. And so last class we talked about monopolies, those big businesses. And so remember, another word for monopoly is trust. And so who has power in this political cartoon? Definitely not the people, right? But it could be these guys here, the trust. And so again, here, this entrance, it says entrance for monopolist. And this sign here, it says this is a senate of the monopolist, by the monopolist, for the monopolist. So what is this cartoon saying? Who is the government working for? And so this government, they are typically going to rule on the side of big business and big industry. And so they are going to look out for the interest of big business, make rules or not make rules, because that's what's in the interest of business. And those businesses, they are helping the growth of the American economy, right? They're building factories, they're building bridges. And so they're bringing in a lot of money and development into the United States. And so I'm going to ask you guys, why did the government side with business owners in labor disputes? So remember back to the first question I asked, or one of the first questions. What is laissez-faire? So why might they side with businesses instead of the workers during labor disputes?